Hey everyone, Clay here. It's that time of year again. Rotten Horror is off until January, so we wanted to give you a little taste of what we've been doing over on Patreon. Amanda and I have been covering the video Nasties, and so we want to give you a little taste with the first episode where we cover Dario Argento's Tenebrae, and hopefully that'll get you psyched for 2024 when we will be covering the Halloween series. So, enjoy Tenebrae, and then join us over on Patreon, where you can get the rest of the Video Nasties series, the Friday the 13th series, the second string of Stephen King series, and Halloween in 2024. All over on patreon.com/thepenskyfile. All right, thanks, guys. Enjoy. Welcome to the Rotten Horror Picture Show. Hello. Welcome back to the Rotten Horror Picture Show Patreon edition. My name is Clay. With me, as always, is Amanda. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm good. I'm here in my white dress and red high heels, and I'm ready to party.
Excellent. Dressed for murder.
Or death?
Or death.
Or death.
Well, that's usually what happens with murder, so
Yeah.
it works.
You're on the other end of it, though.
Yes. Usually we cover movies off the 200 best horror movies of all time list from Rotten Tomatoes, but this is our Patreon for 2023, and
Hello.
we are diving into movies off the Video Nasties list. Now, I figured we should probably talk about what that is before we get into the movies themselves.
Yeah.
The first movie we're doing is Dario Argento's Tenebrae. So why are we doing this? What were the Video Nasties? So basically, bear with me here.
Everybody put your thinking caps on, sit down at your desks, open your textbook to page 32.
With the advent of home video in the late 70s and early 80s, there was, in the UK, there was no classification or rating system for home video. There was for theatrical releases, but not for video because it was so brand new.
Okay.
And so the only thing that they had to go by was something called the Obscene Publications Act, which defined obscenity as that which may, quote, tend to deprave and corrupt persons who are likely having regard to all relevant circumstances to read, see, or hear the matter contained or embodied in it. This definition is, of course, open to wide interpretation.
Yeah.
So there was what that meant, basically, is that since there was no singular governing body covering this stuff, the police and whoever decided that they cared enough to do so were able to take videos off the shelves at their own discretion based on literally anything.
Okay.
Which apparently famously involved the seizing of the Dolly Parton musical, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, because they thought it was pornographic.
Yeah.
And the Video Retailers Association was alarmed by the apparently random seizures and asked the DPP, which was the Director of Public Prosecutions, to provide a guideline for the industry so that stockists or distributors could be made aware of the titles which were liable to be confiscated. The DPP recognized that the current system, where the interpretation of obscenity was down to individual chief constables, was inconsistent and decided to publish a list that contained names of films that had already resulted in a successful prosecution or where the DPP had already filed charges against the video's distributors. The list became known as the DDP. Sorry, not Diamond Dallas Page. The DPP.
If only.
If only. I feel like he'd be cool about it. He'd let you watch Evil Dead if you want to watch Evil Dead.
Yeah, I feel like it would be like the DDP's list of movies you should watch.
Yes. The list became known as the DPP list of Video Nasties, which was a term coined by conservative activist and educator Mary Whitehouse. who partnered with the UK's National Viewers and Listeners Association to prosecute distributors who traded the association's eponymous video nasties as they came to be known. Based on the belief that they offended Britain's Obscene Publications Act, legislation was pursued in 1984 to mandate that the BBFC, which is the British Board of Film Censors, should certify films before release.
And this is how the movie censor begins.
Yes, this is literally how the movie censor begins. Which is wild, because that means that they had this overly aggressive government body that was, when it really came down to it, once they really got into it, started re-editing these movies.
Yeah.
And the weird thing about it was a lot of these movies were passed by the censors for theatrical distribution, but not for video distribution. And there's like a weird class thing built into it as well, because even movies that were approved for the cinemas were denied home release certification, like The Exorcist and Straw Dogs, which were pulled from shelves. The Exorcist was illegal in the UK until 1999.
That, I feel like I've heard that stat. I don't know if I've heard it. I think I've heard it from you in the past. That's insane to me.
Yeah.
Because I remember even in 1999 it being considered like a horror movie classic.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just crazy to me that like a whole country just couldn't watch it.
Yeah. And the movies, the 72 video nasties, were basically the result of two lists of movies. There was the prosecuted movies, which meant that any film on this list would make the dealer or distributor liable to prosecution for disseminating obscene materials. Dealers could be fined or jailed, and the film itself would be declared obscene if the prosecution was successful. And the second list, the first list was 39 movies. The second list was 33 movies, and that was non-prosecuted, which meant the title could be confiscated under a less obscene charge, which meant cops could take it, and as long as the dealer cooperated and pled guilty, they'd escape personal prosecution.
Wow.
So they were actually going after like video store owners who were putting these movies on the shelves.
So I have a question. What happened if you were somebody who owned one of these movies in your house? Like what if I found this movie somewhere and I bought it and I had it in my house, and then I don't know, for some reason the cops ended up getting a warrant to search my house. If they found this movie, would I be in trouble?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like it works the way that in the early days of weed legalization, it worked, where it was technically legal to have it.
Yeah.
But it was illegal to sell it or distribute it.
Okay. That reminds me, actually, I was in Savannah recently, which is a lovely city. They have a prohibition museum.
Oh, really? Oh, that's fun.
It's very kitschy. It's very fun. There's a speakeasy at the end. Go for the speakeasy.
That's excellent.
It is. But so, that was prohibition rules, where you could not, it was illegal to make and sell spirits and alcohol, but it was not illegal to own it.
Right.
So if you had your moonshine or your whiskey or whatever, it was just like in your house, you were probably fine. But if they found out where you got it, that person was in trouble.
Right.
Okay.
Which is really interesting. Like, it's such an interesting way to handle that stuff. I mean, I guess it makes the most sense. Otherwise, you'd be arresting everybody. But
it's just fascinating to think of, because like you said this was happening in the 80s?
Yes. The list was made public in 1983, and it ran through the entire decade of the 80s. Wow. And into the 90s, it loosened a bit. Yeah. But a lot of the movies on this list were still banned at the turn of the century, which is a great way to make most of the people who are listening to this feel real old.
Yes, the turn
or
of
real
the
young,
century.
depending on how.
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you were like, I wasn't even born yet, then you're a lucky bastard.
Yeah, as the decade wore on, punishments for films showcasing obscenity or those that had not been classified by the BBFC continued. Films such as The Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre had their content heavily cut or were banned from home release. Video nasties were also credited by some in government as an influencing factor of the Hungerford Massacre, a murderous spree of shootings that resulted in the death of 16 people. There was also another incident where, actually I think is directly sort of referenced in Censor, or at least inspired in Censor, where there was a murder and the person who committed the murder claimed that they did it because of Child's Play 3.
Oh,
and
yeah.
which led to Child's Play 3 being banned in England.
Yeah. I vaguely remember this, like hearing about it at some point.
And it actually, this leads into Tenebrae, because there's a lot of that discussion in Tenebrae as well. James Furman, the secretary of the BBFC, was even quoted as believing adults needed to be shielded alongside children. Well before the video nasty panic was underway, Furman's response to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was, quote, "It's all right for you middle-class cineasts to see this film, but what would happen if a factory worker in Manchester happened to see it?"
Wow, that's so fucking condescending and patronizing and gross.
Yes, there was also a conservative member of parliament named Graham Bright, who suggested in a live televised interview that, quote, "research is taking place and it will show that these films not only affect young people, but I believe dogs as well."
Oh, leave the dogs out of it. They didn't do anything.
But yeah, generally what happened is it's believed that the ban on the Nasties, the video Nasties, is seen as a conservative government reaction to increase chaos and turmoil of everyday life in the 80s. It's easier to blame, and it always has been, it's easier to blame movies than actually look at real problems that require real answers.
Yeah.
And it even got so out of hand that movies that weren't horror or exploitation were being pulled off the shelves, like the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. There was roughly 3,000 people who were prosecuted over the course of the video nasty scare.
Jesus.
Though the boom was in the 80s and through the 90s, the BBFC would loosen its grip. Many of the banned films did not pass certification until the turn of the century. Evil Dead wasn't legal until 2000. But what is the result of this? It's the same thing that happens every time, which is when the government cracks down on literature or art or anything like that, it develops a black market underground, which just makes people want to read it that much more.
Absolutely.
And so you had these sort of back alley tape traders who were selling duplicates of duplicates of duplicates of The Evil Dead, which, I mean, is probably a fantastic way to watch that movie.
Yeah, but it's so weird to think of this because, like, I find this is one of those things where, like, when I hear about it, I always think it happened way longer ago than it did.
It was in the previous century, Amanda.
Yeah, that's true. But it was within our lifetimes. Yeah. Like, which is crazy to me, like, because it sounds both very, very antiquated and almost quaint. Do you know what I mean? This idea that, like, it's videotapes that are doing it. It's just so strange to realize that this was happening up through the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that happens every time something new comes along.
Oh yeah,
that the governing bodies don't understand or don't have a grip on.
Well, and like you were saying, it's this sort of thing when there are bigger problems happening that are complicated and therefore difficult to solve. It's a lot easier to pin things to something that feels tangible and simple and easy. It's sort of like after, the Columbine shooting, when all of a sudden it was like, well, violent video games. Yeah, that's what's causing.
Do you remember? Like, I think about this from time to time. There was a period in our lifetime when we were like, high school, middle school, high school age.
Sure.
Where Marilyn Manson was like the most dangerous person on the planet.
Yeah.
And now if you go back and you watch the stuff that he was doing, it's like, yeah, that's kind of quaint, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, he was like, that's music that when I was a kid, I would not listen to.
Really?
Because like, I was like, I don't want any part of that guy.
Oh, wow. See, I do remember listening to Marilyn Manson, not like super regularly, but when I did, I would always make sure, or in my childhood head, thought I was making sure that my parents couldn't hear it.
Right.
I would listen to it, but I didn't want them thinking I listened to it.
And part of me is a little bit nostalgic for that kind of feeling, because I feel like there's not any sort of popular media that has that kind of bite to it anymore.
Well, it's interesting because, like, I'm remembering the proud defiance of my older brother walking around our house in a Godsmack t-shirt.
Yes.
And now
Mom and Dad are gonna freak when they see my new Mudvayne t-shirt.
But now it does. It's funny, and I know this is probably how every single generation feels as they get older. Where now you're like, yeah, but there's like beheading videos on the internet.
Yeah,
like real ones.
That's the tough thing. Is we've kind of
like we've gone from Cannibal Holocaust, which feels almost like, you know what I mean? Like those things feel silly when you watch them back now, but at the time they were horrifying.
Yeah,
to people.
There's the worlds have really, it seems like the worlds have blurred quite a bit with the advent of the internet, where it's everything is available now. So
do you think that was maybe part of why they had to phase out some of these laws? Is it was just like,
maybe
because by 1999 and 2000, like, yeah, you were probably able to find this on the internet. Maybe not in the sense that maybe you couldn't stream the full movie on the internet yet, but you could definitely buy it.
Yeah.
You know, or download it from somewhere.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was they realized that they had gone too far.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the movies that they were prosecuting people for, they ended up passing with few cuts or uncut by the turn of this, by 2000. You know.
Yeah.
Like Tenebrae. Tenebrae was a prosecutable film.
Wow.
that was released in theaters, but was prosecutable on video, and I believe it was released uncut in the UK in 2003. Wow. So, you know, it's the craziness of mass hysteria, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's so fascinating how frequently this stuff happens, because like it always coincides with new technologies, it seems like, because they did the same thing to comic books in the 50s.
Yep.
They've done it to TV. They've done it to movies. They've done it to video games. They've done it to music.
Yep.
Everything that comes along that has a grip on the younger people.
Yeah.
There's always a reason to point out why this thing is evil, because the older group doesn't understand it.
Yeah, it's a reactionary response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Elvis.
Yeah.
Put Elvis in jail for shaking his ass at people.
Right, exactly. You only shoot him on TV from the waist up.
Right.
So the people at home can't see him move his legs.
But decorum, Amanda.
Yes.
You have to maintain decorum. What will my daughter what is happening to my daughter? I don't understand.
She's not supposed to have a sexuality.
Her mother never looked at me like that. But just a quote from Stanley Kubrick to round out this element of it, which is to try and fasten any responsibility on art as the cause of life seems to me to put the case the wrong way around. Art consists of reshaping life, but it does not create life nor cause life. Furthermore, to attribute powerful, suggestive qualities to a film is at odds with the scientifically accepted view that even after deep hypnosis in a post-hypnotic state, people cannot be made to do things which are at odds with their natures.
Thanks, Stan.
Yeah, and I think it's good. We're starting with this movie, Tenebrae, because there is quite a bit of this sort of talk in there. It's sort of central to the movie. Yeah. And of course, Tenebrae is from 1982. It is not on our main list, but it has a 79% Rotten Tomatoes score and a 78% audience score. You know what? Let me pull. I don't think I did a review for this. Let's. For our reviews, it has a. This is a little bit. This is ironic. It is 100% from the BBC.
Huh.
It says sadistically beautiful and viciously exciting. Welcome to True Terror with Dario Argento's shockingly relentless Tenebrae. Slant Magazine also says Tenebrae is a riveting defense of auteur theory, ripe with self-reflexive discourse and various moral conflicts. It's both a riveting horror film and an architect's worst nightmare. And the worst rating is a 40 from Time Out Magazine. It says, it does confirm Argento's dedication to the technicalities of constructing images. Grand Guignol for... Oh, geez, this is pretentious. Grand Guignol for Luono Vogue, perhaps. But you'll still end up feeling you've left some vital digestive organs back in the seat.
I don't even know what that.
Yeah, that's a pretty douchey review.
Yeah.
Had you seen this before?
Nope.
No. Okay.
That's it. That's all I got. Nope.
Yeah, I had seen this a few times. This is one I feel like I think about this one a lot. My favorite thing about Argento movies is they all kind of occupy this weird sort of dream space.
Yeah.
Where the memory of them is almost more evocative than the movie itself sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I'm always happy to come back and revisit this one. And I'm happy we watched this one as well, because I hadn't really ever sat down and really watched it and thought about it analytically. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff to talk about. So before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to play the trailer and then we're going to talk about Tenebrae.
Captain Schiavone, homicide squad. The book deals with a murder committed with an old-fashioned open razor.
Wish I'd never written that book.
Okay, Tenebrae, directed by Dario Argento, written by Dario Argento, starring Anthony Franciosa, Giuliano Gemma, Daria Nicolodi, Veronica Lario, who is the wife of Silvio Berlusconi.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or was later after this movie.
I hope so.
Ava Robbins, 3 members of Goblin. It's not all of Goblin. That's why Goblin is not credited in the soundtrack for just doing the music, because technically they are not Goblin.
Got it.
I believe the guy who owned the name was not there.
They are Oblin.
And yes, Oblin, because Jerry didn't show up. And everyone's favorite exploitation dad and or cop, but in this case literary agent, John Saxon.
Yes.
Amanda, what happens in Tenebrae?
Visiting Rome on a promotional tour for his new novel, writer Peter Neal is pulled into a murder mystery as someone familiar with his work begins a series of killings. While the police look into the crimes, Neal investigates on his own, aided by his beautiful assistant Anne and a tenacious young local named Johnny. As the murderer brutally dispatches other victims, Neal gets closer to discovering the psychopath's identity. Dun dun dun.
Mm-hmm.
Classic Argento plot.
Yes. Well, yes.
Yeah. American artist in Rome, murder mystery. Who's the killer? Yeah.
Yeah. This is a lot of, there's a lot of Argento greatest hits in this, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, other things you'll find in this movie include
Yes.
construction site hobo.
Favorite kind.
Yeah. Best kind / scariest kind.
Yes.
White dresses and red high heels.
Yes.
Somebody's got a thing.
For a movie called Tenebrae, which is apparently Latin for darkness.
Yes.
It is a very brightly shot movie.
I'm sure that's on purpose.
Yes. Especially since the DP for this is the same DP for Suspiria.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about the look of it a little bit, because I can't decide if I like it or not, because it is so bright.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like every single scene is you can
like
almost
mall
see the
lighting.
light
Yeah.
just off the side of the camera, just blasting people.
Yes. You'll also find an extremely athletic dog.
Yes. Yeah, man.
Holy shit.
And persistent.
Yeah.
Like, he does not give up.
Dedicated. That dog knows what he wants, and he wants to kill that child.
Yes.
You'll find competitive fence climbing.
Yeah, lots of fence climbing.
Oh my God. I wanted to go back and count, but I just couldn't do it. I lost track every time.
At least 5, I think.
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
I would say probably closer to 7 or 8.
Yeah.
But, somebody can count and tell me. You'll also find repressed memories.
Mm-hmm.
Textbook Italian Giallo misogyny.
Yes. Yeah, there's the
Textbook.
There is the great line where the cop says to his female partner, shit, where the hell is it? I lost it.
Oh, no.
I should have a tough male assistant who runs fast.
Oh.
Is what he says to his partner when they are going after the guy at the phone booth. And he's very mad that he's probably joking, but it's also very much in line with how these movies treat women for a lot of times.
Yes. You'll also find beachfront fetish party.
Yes. Yeah, there's some weird kinky shit going down in that beach.
Yeah.
Which we are going to talk about.
Ties in with those red high-heeled shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And death by modern art.
Yes,
Killed by an art.
Another Argento classic going all the way back to Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Main character killed by modern art.
Modern art.
So,
Yes.
Tenebrae. it is interesting to look back at Bird with the Crystal Plumage. We've watched, this is our fourth Argento movie. We've done Bird with the Crystal Plumage,
Yes.
Deep Red, Suspiria,
Mm-hmm.
and now Tenebrae, which is a pretty good sampling of his thing. Lots of crossover.
Yeah. It's tough. It almost reminds me of when we were either doing like Scream movies or the Friday the 13th movies, and there were just enough of the same beats in each that sometimes my brain starts to blend them a little bit.
Yep.
Like Suspiria stands out a little bit more, I think, because there's a female protagonist and it all happens so much inside the dance school.
Mm-hmm.
But Crystal Plumage and Deep Red and this, there are scenes that you could probably cut and swap in and out of these movies and not notice right away that you had switched to the wrong movie.
Well, I mean, the thing that's interesting is like this has a lot of things that he's featured in a lot of other movies. It's got crazy animal attacks, which is in multiple. I mean, Suspiria, the blind guy gets eaten by the dog.
Yep.
There's a rat sequence in Inferno, which we'll get to when we get to Inferno later on. It has the classic Argento. If you're going to play the hits, you got to play the greatest Argento hit, which is putting a woman's head through a pane of glass.
Yes. In the midst of her murder or immediately after it.
Yes. Death by Modern Art, as you said. And also there's the adjusted memory and the idea that you have taken in more than you realize until you stop. Interestingly, that which is the linchpin of Deep Red is just kind of like a mid-movie afterthought in this one.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads you into the back half. But
yeah, it sort of is like a nice little nugget to sort of explain part of what's been going on so far, but it's not the same like, oh, the whole point of this movie is pivoting on this lapsed memory.
Right. Yeah. There's one that's really like a fascinating literalization of this idea. I'm going to ruin this movie for you.
Hooray.
His third movie, which was called Four Flies on Grey Velvet.
Oh. God, the names of some of these.
They're so good. They're kind of terrible, but they're also great.
Right, yeah. They're so over the top that they've come back around to being amazing.
Yeah. So the way that they catch the killer in that movie is...
With four flies on Grey Velvet.
Sort of. It's based on the idea that when a person dies, the eyes permanently burn the last thing that they saw onto the retina.
Ooh.
And so they go into the murder victim's eyes and pull out this image, which looks to be four flies on gray velvet, but turns out that it's a necklace. And so they figure out what the necklace is, which then leads them to figure out who the killer is. So it's this interesting literalization of what you see at first is then reassessed and turned into the actual key to the mystery.
Yeah, and you're like making the human body a literal camera.
Yes.
Yeah.
You also get his favorite trope, seemingly, which is the American artist who is in Europe.
Yes.
And there's a lot of really interesting sexuality stuff going on in this.
Yep.
Which we can get into a bit later. So it's interesting how he's playing with a lot of the same ideas and the same themes.
Mystery killer with black leather gloves.
Gotta have it.
Leaving strange messages or phone calls.
Gotta have it.
Oh yeah.
But he's kind of he's using the same elements to tell these sort of like different stories with kind of different thematics. And I've always kind of felt to an extent David Lynch does kind of similar thing where a part of me for a while kind of felt like he just kept making the same movie but like refining it. Like if you see Mulholland Drive and then you go back and you watch Lost Highway, it's like, okay, I can see how he got from Lost Highway to
or Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet, even Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. It's a lot of the same kind of vibe that he just keeps refining and refining. And I kind of feel like Argento does the same thing. Yeah. So what did you think of this one overall?
Overall, I really liked it. I find that it struck me less than the other Argento movies that we've watched. I feel like those ones had a stronger visual style. Yeah. For better or for worse, you know, like In a weird way, this one almost seemed more normal looking at times than like Suspiria, where everything is just so heightened. I liked it a lot, actually, but it's still kind of like weirdly fuzzy in my head.
Yeah.
You know, like the narrative I felt like had a little less drive behind it.
Yeah, that's I've read was one of the criticisms, is that it feels like it's not a driving narrative.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned that in the synopsis, it's another story about the person who's not a cop getting involved in their own investigation. And it is that, but that doesn't really start to happen until pretty deep into the movie. Peter Neal is just sort of like hanging out.
Yeah.
Like scoping out chicks for most of the movie.
Yeah, and he's an interesting character because I think, like, whereas with most of the protagonists in the other Argento movies we've watched, there's something kind of neurotic about them, or they're upset by something, or something has... Typically, I mean, it's they've witnessed a murder.
Right.
Or,
yes, that's the other thing. Usually, these protagonists actually see the murder.
Yes.
Peter Neal is completely oblivious.
Yeah, and I think that kind of impacts how he moves through the movie for the first half.
Yeah.
Because our other Argento protagonists have seen something horrific, and that has made them, for better or for worse, personally invested in what's going on. And so they've been affected by it. It has already started to change them. And so we're watching them go through this, and because they're invested, I feel like it's easier for me to be invested as the viewer. And in this one, it's interesting because the whole like first half the movie, there's this kind of like split between what Peter Neal, the author, is doing and then what the killer is off doing, and the two only sort of brush against one another at first. It takes a while for those two plots to really enmesh with one another.
Yeah.
And so it makes for like a weird viewing experience, I think, because some of the beginning of the movie feels like a little disjointed in my memory. Like, not even necessarily while I was watching it, but now thinking back on it, I'm like, okay, was the lesbian couple killed first, or was it the girl who got chased by the dog?
Sure.
And like, wait a minute, how did the shoplifter tie into all of this again? And like, why was she killed?
Yeah.
And I'm still kind of fuzzy on some of those details. And then later in the kind of second half of the movie, when things ramp up a little bit and things tie in a bit tighter together, it's like, oh, okay. I get where this is going.
Even so, the opening handful of scenes are a bit what's the word? Kind of leaves you off kilter a bit because it's none of it's really related, and it ultimately isn't really that related. Like, there's one element that I always kind of almost forget about, which is when Peter Neal goes to the airport after he bikes there.
Yes. What? I'm sorry, but like, I now should I should have known right away he was the murderer.
Yeah.
Because what kind of psychopath bikes through New York City to the airport?
Yeah. He was. Imagine if you were in New York and you saw a person on a bicycle on like the BQE or like,
oh my God,
you would be within your right to hit that person, I think.
And the cops would just come and say, thank you.
Yeah, yes, you shouldn't have been on the street. But when he, in that sequence at the airport, there is another woman who's working with Jane, his fiance, who never shows up again in the whole movie.
Yeah, and I still don't fully understand why Jane trashes his bag.
Yeah.
And why she's following him to Italy in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. I think that this movie is subtextually and thematically really interesting. But I think as far as this is kind of how all of his movies tend to be, as far as like a moment-to-moment plot, I think it's pretty loosey-goosey.
Yeah. Yes.
And I don't know if that's by design, if it's meant to be disorienting, because there's lots of, I think he's done this before too, there's lots of doubles where a lot of people look like each other.
Yep.
Peter Neal kind of looks like the cop.
Yep.
The cop's partner kind of looks like Dario Nicolodi.
Yep. Yep.
His fiance kind of looks like the first girl who gets killed.
Who also kind of looks like the girl from the beach flashbacks.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think once you get into, like, you're spending the first half of this movie basically trying to track what's going on, and then when they finally have to start paying off the story, it gets kind of like, what?
Yeah. Once
they reveal that Jane is having an affair with the book agent, you start wondering, like, well, wait, so is she only in Italy because she's there to be with John Saxon, or is she there because she's stalking Peter Neal? Like, why is she wrecking his clothes? Is it just because that they've broken up or something? Like, the adultery subplot feels a little weird on the surface and kind of comes out of nowhere. It just all seems like a motivation for what is, I think, actually a pretty good twist.
Yes.
When they tell you that there is actually two killers, that Peter Neal figured it out and killed the first killer in order to then use that killer as a cover while he kills John Saxon and his cheating fiance.
Yeah, and I kind of love that because it really does tie directly into the very opening of the movie, where it's the gloved hands holding the book that Peter Neal wrote, Tenebrae, and reading a passage out of it in front of a fireplace.
Yes.
Which I'm just like, sign me up.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do all day. Just read books about murder in front of a fireplace.
Well, people might not know this about you, but when you read a book, every page, when you finish it, you tear it out, you burn it.
Absolutely.
Because, like, why else? Why wouldn't you?
I mean, that's what you're supposed to do.
It forces you to remember it better.
Yeah, and it frees the spirit of the book.
And it makes the other books more valuable.
I thought you were going to say more afraid.
That too. You line up all your books on the coffee table.
Look what you made me do. And I just rip it out page by page.
I'm looking at you, Nietzsche. You're next.
Bold of you to assume I own a book by Nietzsche.
Yeah, well, no, we'll put it in the fire. But yeah, it's. I think the surface level plot is. It's interesting to compare this to Bird with the Crystal Plumage or Deep Red, because Bird with the Crystal Plumage, as we said at the time, is almost, it feels like it's entirely made out of tropes.
Yeah.
And Deep Red, I feel like, is probably the most consistent plot-wise, the plot to weirdness ratio.
Yes, and things actually lining up with what you've seen.
Yeah.
Like with what you've been shown and with what you can logically put together.
And the turn at the end of Deep Red is one of those things where he's not cheating by not showing you something and then showing it to you. He shows it to you at the time. You're just not looking for it.
Right.
And so it makes the twist make a little bit more rational sense.
Yep.
Whereas this one is fun, but I think what makes this movie more interesting is the subtext and the themes of it. Because this is very much a response type film to critics and other people who claim, kind of what we talked about earlier, that he is too misogynist and that his movies are too violent and that this violence could bleed out into the real world. And so you've got this character who is, interestingly enough, the character who turns out to be the initial murderer is the critic who is making these claims at him.
Yes.
And so before that reveal, you have these kind of interesting conversations between Peter Neal and this guy where they get into these kind of ideas about whether or not movies create psychos, or whether or not they make psychos more creative, to quote Scream. And it's an interesting look at that through Argento's lens, which he then ultimately dials to 11 by essentially going like, I don't think that this is the case. However, I'm going to give you the middle finger and then just say, for this instance, it is.
Yeah.
The guy who created it, he's the killer.
Oh, and not only that, but he is inspiring others to do horrible, violent things and emulate his fucked up characters.
Yeah.
Because the TV critic is the first killer. So he has been consuming, and like there's the hints that he's been obsessed with Peter Neal's work.
Right.
And so he's been consuming this work, and it has driven him to a point where, yes, he has killed them all. The first batch of people to get murdered in this movie. And then it doubles down even further by having the creator kill the psychopath who was inspired by his work and then take up the mantle of being that killer.
Right. Yeah.
Of like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right now.
Yeah.
Now it's my turn.
And it's an interesting thing, too, to think about in the era where these movies were being censored, that you have your killer being a critic who is actively destroying the work as he's killing people by throwing it in the fire or shoving it in people's mouths.
Yeah. Yeah, there's also a lot of, like, in this movie, death by art.
And death as art, which
Yes.
is another Argento hallmark.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's sort of like art and the making and consuming of art, literal and figurative consuming, brings everybody in this movie nothing but trouble.
Yes.
Even Elsa, the girl at the very beginning who's the shoplifter, she gets caught stealing a book. She gets caught stealing Tenebrae.
Yeah.
So because she's trying to consume this art, it gets her in trouble. And then later, she's the one who, when the killer attacks her, he stuffs the book pages into her mouth to make her literally consume it. And that's part of what kills her there. And then the next person killed is, I think her name was like Tilda or something. Tilda? She's the other critic.
With the girlfriend?
Yes.
Yeah.
And when she sits down to interview Peter Neal, even though they're kind of buddy-buddy at first for the interview, she's like, why are you such a raging misogynist?
Right.
And is like really hard, like goes at him really hardcore with that kind of stuff. And then she and her girlfriend get murdered.
Which is actually kind of funny because she goes at him really hard about why you're such a misogynist. And then the following scene is her criticizing, basically calling her girlfriend a slut.
Yeah. Oh, she like literally calls her a whore, I think. Yeah.
I think, and as far as the kills go in this too, it's, I think they kind of ramp up where Suspiria has that obvious amazing first shocking kill. Yep. And Deep Red has a lot of great set pieces. This one kind of eases into it where the shoplifting girl, her death is not super inventive.
Yeah.
But then you get to the death of the lesbian couple, which is really cool because you get that amazing shot where she pulls the shirt over her head and he slices the shirt open and shows her face, which is fantastic. And then, of course, you get the head through the glass, and then both the bodies are kind of composed in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
And then as you get deeper into the film, you get, the girl with the axe in the stomach isn't that great, but you get this grand finale at the end where Jane gets her hand cut off and like Jackson Pollock's the wall with this white throughout the whole movie. There are these white walls and like highlights of white and people wearing white. Yep. And it's almost like a foreshadowing thing because it's like, oh yeah, what's with all the white? And then at the end, he shows you why all the white, where he just sprays blood on everything.
Absolutely, it's why the red high heels.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the foreshadowing of the white and red. Yeah, that it's just going to be everything's covered in blood by the end of this.
Yeah, the last 15 minutes of this movie I think are really great.
Yes.
It's everything kind of comes together in a way that is both what's the word? Ridiculous, but also like very satisfying.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the big things that stands out to me in this is for a movie where the mystery is kind of not super tight. I feel like there's a lot of contrived movement and a lot of contrived elements. Fence climbing. Like we were talking last night when Peter Neal's at the airport. I was like, you can the number one indicator that this was made in the last century is that Peter Neal just drops his bag at the airport and then walks like 50 yards in the other direction to use the phone and doesn't worry about it and doesn't get jumped by the TSA. Yes. But it's like he has to just drop his bag and walk away. It has
to be left unattended in order to get vandalized.
And then later on the dog has to chase her
Yes.
all the way to this house.
Yeah, to like a comical extent. This like it starts off like it was funny. That scene with the dog started off, I kind of felt bad for the dog because the dog was just behind a fence and the girl starts like banging on the fence, kind of antagonizing the dog. And then the dog starts chasing her and you're like, oh shit, okay, this is dangerous dog. And then it keeps going and you're like, wow, this is a really dedicated dog. And then it keeps going and it keeps going to the point where it's like, I would say comical that the dog is still chasing her.
Oh, definitely.
Like over fences, over other fences, through houses. Like it gets to a point where it's like, all right, this is absurd on purpose.
Yeah, and then once she gets to the house, the dog is still outside.
Yes.
Just jumping at the windows, which also has another Argento hallmark, which is probably one of my favorites, which is the literal threshold crossing.
There you go.
Where she first ends up in this stone cold basement area where the killer is keeping all of his accoutrement.
Yes.
And then opens a door into this lush, beautiful, modern apartment with floor to ceiling windows and plants and shit in the inside.
Yeah,
it's
and like
cool.
conversation pits and cushions. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is very contrived how she ends up there. She gets sort of dropped off by a random dude on a motorcycle.
In the middle of nowhere.
Of nowhere. And then she gets chased by the dog into it just so happens to this one house where the killer's lair is, and the killer has just so happened to accidentally leave the key in the door.
And then when she's trying to get in there, it's like her hand is going up and like messing.
Yeah.
It's like that feels like business. It doesn't feel natural. Like,
yeah, she didn't just turn and grab the handle and the key and get in there. Yeah, the whole thing is very. It's crafted on purpose.
Yeah.
It does not feel like normal human behavior.
Yeah. And then at the end of the movie, after when they first of all, when they think Peter Neal has killed himself.
Yeah.
And it turns out that he just happened to have like a movie prop on him.
Right? Like, where did he get that?
I know. Like, if that's the kind of thing that you would set up earlier in the movie in some way.
Yes.
However, you wanted to squeeze it in there. But
yeah, they set up other stuff. His bag getting vandalized is very set up.
Which is only there for red herring purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was... Because when he first did it, I remember being like, oh shit, this movie ends on a really intense note. This guy like kills these people and then slits his own throat with a straight razor. That's insane.
Yeah.
Nope.
And then after that, they assume he's dead, and the cop and Dario Nicolodi go out to the car.
Yep.
And then the cop's like, I'll be right back. And he goes back into the house.
Yeah, why does he go back in?
And then Dario Nicolodi also goes, I should probably go back in the house. And she also goes back in the house.
Yes. Yeah, people don't have good judgment in this movie.
Yeah, it just feels like they are being pushed by the plot.
Yeah.
More than any sort of natural inclination to do things.
Yeah.
To the point where it doesn't I think in certain, like in something like Suspiria or Deep Red, I think you can get away with a lot where it's like, oh, it's very dreamlike. But this is a lot more grounded, I think.
Yeah, which is weird for it being the movie we're talking about that almost has like the loosey-gooseyest of logic behind it. It looks more... I don't know. I don't know if it's just because this one's later than the other ones we've watched of his, so it looks more modern, but it feels more like the real world. It still feels weird. It's still very much like the world as seen through the lens of Dario Argento, but it doesn't feel quite so strange. Definitely not as the world of Suspiria, and definitely not with the world of Deep Red.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like there's lots of people going to like offices.
Yeah.
There's lots of people kind of like, I don't know, just like being downtown, going to the police station, having a meeting, getting a coffee. Like it's not quite so, even Bird with the Crystal Plumage, the scene where he goes out to find the artist and he lives in the boarded up barn. There's like not that same kind of sense of like these almost dreamlike places.
Yeah, there's nobody eating cats in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's as I learned from Joe Bob Briggs, this movie takes place in Rome.
Yes.
But you never see any classic Roman what's the word I'm looking for?
Like landmarks.
Landmarks.
Yeah, they never go to like the
architecture.
Spanish Steps or the Trevi Fountain. You don't see the Colosseum in the background.
Apparently it's a suburb of Rome.
Okay.
That was designed by Mussolini, and so it is all this brutalist, ugly architecture.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of is in step with everything else about this movie, which is kind of like it really kind of takes place in a world that is very ugly.
Yeah.
And despite everybody being dressed in pastels and stuff, in the background, there's constantly people fighting.
Yeah, there is.
There's a man screaming at his girlfriend or partner.
Yep.
There's just like people punching each other. There's a pan through the police office where a fight breaks out in the hallway.
Yeah, like 2, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very chaotic and a very violent kind of world that this movie seems to be existing in.
Right, even though all the men are well dressed and all the women are wearing like dresses and high heel shoes.
Yeah.
People are still fighting in the background.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me think about what is the other Argento element in this that I think is a little bit more obscured than usual. Which is the idea that usually we kind of talked about this with Crystal Plumage, and I didn't read it this way the first time when I watched Crystal Plumage, but I kind of reassessed it, and I think we've talked about it since then. Because we had talked about Crystal Plumage being like, oh, so it's about this American guy, and he's like, he thinks he's got this stuff under control. He's very confident, but actually, Argento's male characters are usually pretty emasculated.
Yeah.
You know, like in Crystal Plumage, I think he's got some like sex issues, which they have the sex metronome.
Oh, yes.
And in Deep Red, the main character is emasculated in different ways and kind of ultimately helpless to the power of the woman and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And this movie actually is kind of the ultimate of that. But it's a little bit more hidden because you've got Peter Neal, who is presented as this like very attractive sort of masculine guy who's accused of being a misogynist, and he's like, hey baby, you know,
and he's kind of always schmoozing with all these like hot younger women who seem to just congregate around him.
Yeah, you know, he's like kind of brushing up against the younger girl when she's going to the bathroom, and he's trying to sleep with Dario Nicolodi, which I'm not convinced they do.
I mean, it's very awkward if they do because she wakes up still on the couch.
Which kind of leads into where I'm going with this. And so the thing that we find out when we find out what the turn is that his fiance has been cheating on him with his agent, right?
Yes.
And they link all of this to these dreams that he's been having about this beachfront fetish party where this woman is, I don't know what she's going to do with these 4 boys, but something kinky.
Yeah.
And then a 5th boy shows up and just slaps her across the face.
Yep.
And then everybody turns on this guy, jumps him, and she ends up putting her red high heel into his mouth. And later we find out through another flashback that this woman was then killed by said boy, which we then find out was Peter Neal.
Yeah. How dare you not let me slap you?
Yes, right.
I'll show you.
So, I think that there is a key to understanding this that is not on the surface of the text, which is the woman who plays the beachfront woman.
Yes.
Is a transgender actress.
Oh.
And so I have this theory that what we're actually watching is Peter Neal as a kid finds this out about this woman, which is why he slaps her. And then because he is so emasculated by what he's found out, and then he's overtaken by her, and basically where did he killed her in Rhode Island, right? They say.
Yeah.
So clearly he comes from money.
Yep.
He's a rich white kid from Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Who's been made a fool of by a woman who turns out to be a transgender woman, which for him I'm sure would be extra emasculating.
Yeah.
And then he gives the same red shoes to his fiancée, who is also emasculating him.
Right, because she has cuckolded him.
Exactly, which is driving him to murder again.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this undercurrent with this character, Peter Neal, of just outwardly projecting masculinity, but actually being very emasculated. Because when he does go to try and sleep with Dario Nickelodeon, he gets slimed at the end.
The heir to the Nickelodeon fortune.
Yes. The next day, it doesn't look like anything happened.
Yeah, she's still in her PJs, still set up on the couch.
Yeah.
She doesn't look particularly tousled. They don't wake up together. There's no good morning, here's your coffee. There's not even any we will not speak of this again. And
so you kind of get the sense that the movie didn't let that happen. And so what Peter Neal ends up being is this character who projects this virility and masculinity in a movie where everybody else is very passionate and kind of sexy, but he is not having sex at all.
Yeah.
And so
I buy that. Yeah.
You've got this very emasculated man at the center of it.
Yeah.
Who ends up doing these murders.
Yeah, the word I keep thinking for him is impotent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect word.
Yeah.
And so I find the subtext of this to be more subtle, but very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that
I'm
works.
sure I could be leaping off tall buildings for these things, but
no, I honestly I buy it, and I think it works even like, even if that actress from the beach scene was not a trans woman, like even if she was just a biological woman, like it still works.
Sure, yeah.
Like I can see why especially in the sort of 70s and 80s parlance that would be even more emasculating. But either way, I can definitely see that where it's just like he can't stand the fact that he does not actually have power over the women around him.
Yeah.
And he can't actually get them to do what he wants.
And he's giving her those shoes as a link to the last time that he was so emasculated that he eventually ended up murdering somebody.
I think there's also a level of like he wants to recreate it. Like he wants to have that feeling of like dominance and power and victory over the woman who has hurt him again. And the best way to do that is, especially since these women already resemble one another, is to really make her embody that first girl. And you can kind of get that high of killing somebody like the same kind of way to try and hit that pinnacle again. Yeah, yeah. Reestablish yourself as the successful Casanova that you think you are.
Yeah. And I think what I find satisfying about all of this is that ultimately you have this movie which was outwardly specifically made to rile up the people who accused him of being misogynist and was banned for the sexualization of the violence and all that kind of stuff. But the movie he's actually giving you is a movie that's rooted in the dangers of toxic masculinity, essentially. Yeah. Which I think is a very nice twist for him.
Yeah, because ultimately it's sort of like, because by the end, Peter Neal has become like a very vile figure. Yeah. Like he's killed these people. He's not repentant at all. And he dies a horrible and also kind of stupid death.
Yeah, he dies pretty dumb.
Yeah, but I think it's on purpose, you know? Like, I think it's like he's not going to go out, like, the cops aren't going to come and he's not going to have some big shootout where he gets to go out in a blaze of glory. Right. He doesn't even really get a chance to threaten Anne, his assistant, who survives. Like, she's kind of coming back into the house and he sort of comes at her and then the art falls on him. Yeah. And he dies this really dumb death, like an ugly modern art statue that just so happens to be standing by the door gets knocked into him and like stabs him in the abdomen. Yeah. How does this emasculated man end up getting killed? He gets penetrated through the abdomen. Through the abdomen, which is also the same way he kills the girl from the beginning. Right. Yep. He stabs her in the stomach. Yeah. So yeah, it is really interesting how he is this sort of like he's a scary figure because he's killed all these people, but he's also like worthy of your derision.
Yeah.
Like he's not a scary killer in the end. Like he's just kind of a pathetic guy.
Yeah, I think it's fun because to see, as much as the twist with John Saxon and the fiance feels like it is not telegraphed in any way. Like I don't think you could have figured this out if you knew the answer.
No, because I remember I feel like I guessed. I think did I guess the bird with the crystal plumage killer, or at like one of the ones we watched. I was like, I'm pretty sure that the killer's a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and it
that's right. Yeah.
There was like something that I don't know if it was like the size of her hands or something like that. But yeah, in this one there was no way you could really put this together.
Yeah.
Based on the things that you see in the movie.
Yeah, even who the first killer is.
Yeah.
Like that one. If you have a sense for dramatic irony, you could probably figure that out.
Yeah.
But like as far as clues and stuff they give you, it's not really.
No.
I mean, I guess kind of if you look back at what he's doing, it makes sense because it's like, oh, he's blaming the book
but there's
for
also
the murders the way that he is accusing Peter Neal of blah blah.
I feel like this movie also features a lot of random peripheral characters.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in this movie.
Yeah, there's just a lot of kind of throwaway. They're like recurring characters, but they barely seem to have a purpose in the movie other than to maybe get killed or be a suspect to be the killer.
Right.
And it muddies the waters in such a way that it almost becomes futile in the first half to even try to narrow down which one of them is doing it.
Yeah. And there's really there's not a lot of sense of like Peter Neal plays things pretty cool. Like he never really gets paranoid.
Yeah.
Like there's no point where he thinks anybody around him is doing this.
Right. He never feels like he's being personal, like somebody's personally out to get him.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you could argue is kind of how a person like that might handle it because he thinks he's kind of...
Thinks he's a big, tough man.
Right. Although he does also want to leave and go to France. But
I think that comes in more so that he can have a cover for the murders he knows he is about to commit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once you get that turn... It is fun to have, the mystery writer actually solved the case, and then decided to use it to his own benefit.
Right. Rather than going to the police and saying, aha, I have done it.
Yeah.
I've discovered the murderer. Instead, he's like, I'm just going to axe this guy in the head.
Yeah. I found myself, because I remembered, as we were watching it, I remembered that ultimately Peter Neal was the killer. I hadn't watched it in a bit, but I couldn't remember... So when the first girl got killed, I was like, wait a minute, he's not even in Rome yet. How could he have killed her?
Yeah.
And so I kind of put that out of my mind for a while, and I forgot the mechanics of how you get to Peter Neal being the killer. And I actually thought maybe I was thinking of a different movie.
Right. Like, it must have been a different Argento movie.
The one thing I was thinking, though, is like, how did he whack his own head with that rock? Again, kind of
good acting.
Yeah, kind of contrived. Like he had to go from the outside, get in the house, kill that dude, run back outside, whack himself in the head till he bled,
and then fall down.
Yeah, until Gianni came and found him.
Yes.
So again, a little contrived.
Yeah.
But with these movies, who's really counting, right? Music.
Oh.
Amazing.
They're so good.
This is when Goblin or three quarters of Goblin.
Yes.
When they nail a song, they really nail a song.
Mm-hmm.
The theme in this one is a real definite earworm.
Yep.
I don't know why their stuff fits his movie so well, but it does.
Yeah, I don't know. I almost wish there was more of it in this movie.
Yeah.
There's a couple really good sequences with the Goblin soundtrack, but it didn't feel quite so prevalent as their music does in some of his other movies.
I think maybe because there were a couple themes that they used in this, and a lot of times you really feel the theme because it's one that they just kind of keep using over and over.
Sure.
Which they do in this, but they do mix it up a bit.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I remember when we went to see them, they played this and it was fucking awesome.
Yeah, it was really good.
because this one,
I didn't even know what movie it was from yet, and I was just like, this fucking rules.
yeah, like the bass line in this is so good, so good. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we round it out?
Just that I find Argento's focus on memory really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like his understanding of memory is both aligned with and also not really, it doesn't really mesh with our modern understanding of human memory.
Wait, you mean the eyes don't keep a permanent record of the last thing that they saw before you died?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that, but also the sort of like the idea that we see or hear or perceive something that is then for some reason lost to us and can be recovered. Like, you know, Peter Neal, his whole impetus for why he becomes the killer in this movie is a repressed memory,
right,
of a murder he committed that he has not been aware of for a very long time. Like, he did this and then they couldn't, there was no evidence, so they didn't prosecute him, but he was suspected, but he repressed the memory of it, and it wasn't until this string of murders triggered something in him that it brought it back up.
Right.
And I find that really interesting because I feel like repressed memories was very much a thing that was like big in the 80s.
Yeah, repressed memory, that was a big thing. Has that been disproven at this point that that's not a thing? I think
it's widely believed to not be a thing.
Yeah.
I think that the general consensus nowadays is that it's not really a thing, maybe with some very rare exceptions.
Yeah.
And I also like, I find it interesting that like Johnny's, he heard the first killer confess and blocked it out of his head and then had to go back to the scene in this very Dario Argento way of like having to go physically put yourself back somewhere to remember something that you missed.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that can happen, but it's interesting because we've sort of learned more and more that actually eyewitness testimony is the least reliable evidence you can have for these things. So I always just find his faith in the human mind and the mind's ability to sort of store this information and then with the right outside stimulus perfectly recall it is really interesting to me. Because I do think in a way he thinks that the mind is like a camera.
Yeah.
That it's all back there. It's on the film reels. You just have to wind it back at the right speed to get the information that you need. Yeah. And I think in real life, that's very untrue.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting because you've got a movie like Deep Red where the way that he figures it out is he literally rewinds the camera and pauses the film.
Yes.
So David Hemmings can go like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's what I saw.
Yes.
Which is not something, it's not something that the human mind can really do. And when you do that, you're not usually remembering it correctly.
Exactly. 9 times out of 10, you're kind of filling in the blanks with what, maybe what you've heard other people say they thought they heard or saw, and maybe what you think our brains fill in so much information for us based on what we expect to be there, not what's actually there.
Yeah.
And I find that line between like perception and fact very interesting, in the fact that Argento just thinks they're the same.
Yeah.
Like that there is some kind of infallible recall that we can get ourselves to with the right external stimuli.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting way to look at the world.
Well, it's almost kind of like the way you remember dreams, right?
Yeah.
Because you wake up from a dream and you're trying to remember a detail of a dream and you're like, well, I think I was going down the stairs, but I don't remember how I got to the bottom. Oh, wait a minute. The stairs turned into a slot. You kind of have that moment where you can go through your stored images. And even though dreams obviously are fake and not real, I mean, the concept is real, but you know what I mean?
But haven't you ever had the opposite experience where you wake up and you start trying to, you say to your partner or your friend or whoever's like, oh man, I had the craziest dream last night.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I was walking through the airport And I was looking for my gate, and I think I was supposed to meet my old college roommate there. And then even as you're saying it, you realize what you're saying is wrong.
Yeah.
And then you start
Yeah.
thinking like, wait, is what I'm saying wrong? Or is that actually what the dream was? And now I'm just feeling like it's not what it was, or was that not what it was? And then the harder you think about it, it just kind of like diffuses and disappears on you,
Yeah.
and you lose a handle on any of it. And
Yeah.
then the whole thing is gone, and you're like, shit. Never mind. Guess it
That's-
wasn't that interesting.
That's how most of my Spanish tests went in high school.
Yeah. Listen to our coverage of La Llorona for an example of this.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting how memory works in Argento's world. You know, in this sort of vaguely dream logic world.
Yeah. Yeah, it puts so much faith into
Yeah.
the senses.
Yeah, and it puts so much kind of responsibility on a single person.
Yeah.
For like, you should be able to recall this. This is stored in your mind somewhere, and you just need to pull it out.
Yeah.
And that will reveal some huge truth about the world around you.
Do you think that is a personal point of view of his as an artist, or do you think it's sort of an adaptation of the murder mystery as it exists in the novel, where it's kind of easier to do that kind of stuff, where it's like at that point they remembered that the knife had green blood on it and that's how they knew it was a Vulcan or something. You know what I mean?
How they knew it was a Vulcan.
But you know, like how in the way that stuff is played out in books,
Oh,
it
yeah.
has that element of going back and kind of like replaying
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah. Or the Sherlock Holmes kind of style. Like, well, I noticed some ash on his shoes, and then I remembered
Yes.
that you know the fireplace had been disturbed at Mr. Brown's house or whatever. Yeah, I wonder if it's kind of not a facet of both, because I do think it is a common element of these sort of murder mystery plots, but he pivots so much importance on them that I do think that it is part of his view of, you know, he's using it as a way, I think, to say something about like the perceptive abilities of the human mind, that like with the right amount of attention and the right amount, like the right type of environment, you can take in things from around you that you weren't even aware you were absorbing.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
I think ultimately,
That arm getting chopped off scene was great.
yeah, it was. I think ultimately what it comes down to is murder mysteries, no matter how you shake it, are preposterous.
Yes.
Which is why they're fun.
Yes.
So we shouldn't get hung up on the how. I'm not saying you're getting hung up, because this is very interesting. Just in general, people who get hung up on the hows and the why. I feel like I've come a long way from the bird with the crystal plumage.
Really?
Because in that one, I was a little bit mad that he kind of presented this story that you really couldn't, as the viewer, you could not solve.
Yeah.
Like there was not enough information for you to solve that until you find the extra memory of, oh wait, no, that was a woman, really.
Right.
And as I've been watching more of these movies, these Giallo movies, I think I'm kind of obsessed with them now. I really enjoy them.
I think you are.
Well, they're so unique in their style.
Yeah, they create such a mood.
Yeah, it's like mood above all else.
Yes.
I just watched Lucio Fulci's 7 Notes in Black, which is it's in America was known as The Psychic. And it's one of the Giallos that has a supernatural bent to it, because the main character, this woman, has psychic powers, and she can kind of see this future murder that's going to happen. And like, you know, that's what I just said is essentially the extent of the story. Like her husband gets,
and the next 90 minutes is just vibes.
Kinda.
Yeah.
You know, she's trying to exonerate her husband, who's been blamed for the murder of this woman.
Yeah.
That they find walled up in the wall of their house. And so the rest of the movie is her kind of like tracking down elements that she's seeing in these psychic visions to try and exonerate her husband. But it's like very moody. It's another one that has a fantastic score to it. And like it just it creates these feelings and images and impressions more than it does like, oh, that was a tight Agatha Christie novel.
Right, right. This is not a Knives Out mystery or whatever they're
Yeah.
calling them now.
I think, see, even with those though, I think.
Oh, I like those.
No, I like those
Yeah.
too. But I feel like there is plenty of bullshit being thrown around in those things because the name
Sure.
of the game in mysteries is misdirection,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And
Red
so-
herrings abound.
Yeah, which is, why I don't know if you saw the stuff about Glass Onion where certain people were getting. You familiar with Ben Shapiro?
Yes.
He
As you can tell by the fact that I went,
he was going off about Glass Onion. He was so mad because the writer for the first half of the movie actively deceived the audience. And it's like, bro, it's a murder mystery. That's what they do.
Yes.
Like,
That's the point, is that like everyone to some extent is actively deceiving.
yeah, even Sherlock Holmes. Like when
Yes.
Sherlock Holmes explains what's going on, it's
Oh,
all
yeah.
bullshit. Like
Yeah.
like you were supposed to look down like, oh, he's got ash on his foot, and
Right.
you as the reader are supposed to
Yes.
figure out
And
that
an ink
means
stain on his left cuff.
that means that he just came in from the moors or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so these Giallo movies, they just really take all these elements of the music and the moody filmmaking and kind of give you this murder mystery that is just so much more of like an impression and a feeling.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing, more so than the last 5 minutes where in rapid succession they tell you why the guy did what he did.
Right. Who's doing it, why they're doing it, and how it's going to end.
Yeah, I will say the Psychic, 7 Notes in Black, actually pretty good as far as the story goes. Fairly tight,
Cool.
especially considering that there's a psychic element involved. But I think this is the only Giallo we're doing, I think.
For our video nasties.
For our video nasties, I believe this is the only one. Bay of Blood is arguably a Giallo. I haven't watched that in a long time. That's a Mario Bava movie that was very influential on the Friday the 13th and the other American slashers,
Interesting.
which I've been looking forward to doing that. But
Yeah.
next time, since it is currently available on Shudder and is kind of difficult to get when it's not available anywhere, we will be doing Possession,
Ooh.
which, man, I can't wait for you to watch Possession.
I can't tell if you're saying that because you're genuinely excited for me, or if this is like gleeful, I can't wait to see your reaction.
It's both. Because I really want to talk about it with you, but I
Okay.
also cannot wait for you to watch this movie.
Oh boy.
Because it is a wild ride.
Okay.
That if you thought the turn in this was weird, buckle up
All
for
right.
Possession.
I am ready.
But apparently the look of Tenebrae was very much inspired by Possession. So
cool.
there's that too.
Yeah, I'm glad we're doing these close together then.
Yeah.
Neat.
But thank you guys. Oh, before we go, I just wanted to say that Tenebrae was it was released with 5 seconds cut in 1999.
5 seconds. Jesus.
Released uncut in 2003. This movie was one of the prosecuted films on the 72 Video Nasties list. The film was released in Italy and throughout most of Europe without experiencing any reported censorship problems, but was classified, prosecuted, and banned as a video nasty in the United Kingdom. Its theatrical distribution in the United States was delayed until 1984, when it was released in a heavily censored version under the title Unsane.
Ooh.
In its cut form, Tenebrae
Bad
received
title.
yeah, it is. It's not great. In its cut form, Tenebrae received a mostly negative critical reception, but the original, fully restored version later became widely available for reappraisal. So, one thing I think we should do for these.
Sure.
On a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being video and 10 being nasty, where would you put this? Because we were watching this kind of going like, I'm surprised that this was a banned film.
Yeah.
All things considered, it's not really, even for 1982, it's not really that bad.
I mean, there's some boobs in it.
There's a, I did like the one lesbian woman who just walked around with one boob out.
Yes.
Like she had like her blanket on, but just
yes.
one boob.
Like wrapped in a sheet.
Like a toga.
Like a toga.
Because,
and it
they're in Rome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just gotta, one boob out.
Yeah.
That's how you keep cool.
That's why they got censored, because
Yeah.
if you're gonna have one, you gotta have both of them.
Right. It needs to be symmetrical.
Yes.
Yeah. On a scale from video to nasty, I don't know. Like is this a 1 to 10 or a 1 to 5? Where
I'd say 1 to 10.
1 to 10.
10, 1 being fairly tame, 10 being I can understand why this would be banned.
I guess like
conceptually,
like a 4 or a 5.
Yeah.
Because I mean, a woman does get her arm chopped off. There's a lot of blood.
Yeah.
There are a few sets and or singles of boobs. But yeah, nothing that these days strikes me as gratuitous, like in the sense of, you're not seeing anybody getting like actively disemboweled.
Yes. Yeah.
Like there's not a lot of like gory special effects. It's just a lot of fake blood.
Yeah, it's weird because like
one mannequin arm.
You've got like noticeably absent from the video nasty list is either Friday the 13th or Friday the 13th Part 2.
Yeah.
And I feel like Kevin Bacon getting an arrow through the neck is more
because
disturbing.
they really close up on that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's more disturbing than any of the violence in this movie.
Yes.
Because the violence here is so theatrical.
Yep.
That I feel like he's again clearly flipping the bird, being like, I'm going to give you all the blood.
Yeah.
So much blood that you can't even know what to do with it.
Yeah. But also there's moments where it cuts away from the violence so that somebody's hand can gracefully knock over a vase.
Yes.
Yes. I'd say like 4 or a 5 maybe.
I do wonder if part of it with this is the sexual subtext of it.
Oh, sure.
Because that's a lot harder to cut. Like if you're editing Friday the 13th, you can cut a couple frames out of the next shot. You can cut a couple frames here and there. You can't cut any of the subtextual stuff going on with that flashback.
Two girlfriends having a fight.
Yeah. You can't cut the concept of lesbian relationship.
Right. The whole concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? What is your score?
I would say it's like a 5.
Yeah.
Because I
enough
think
blood to get it up to a 5.
I think it's enough blood to get up to a 5, but it's also the other stuff that I feel like, okay,
Yeah.
I can see why conservative government in the 80s might be threatened by this stuff.
Boo.
They don't want their children learning
to know about lesbians.
I guess, yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. We will be back next month with Possession. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Clay.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.